With the short format of the Starter Deck 13 meta, Extra Booster Memorial Collection in the One Piece trading card game is coming shortly on May 3rd. We've talked about it in several videos on this channel. Some of the cards, some of the ideas, concepts, and decks that are going to be showcased in this upcoming format. A lot of people are excited about this format because it not only brings life into old leaders, but also starts up life to new leaders or really just shifts the meta entirely. You guys really enjoyed my last tier list video going over the upcoming meta, so we're going to go do it again with EB01. Now I've got this separated into a couple different tiers: Tier S, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and the fun tier. S tier, best decks in format. Tier 1, really good decks that wouldn't surprise me at all if they either won a major event or were among the top 4 or 5 popular decks in a tournament. Tier 2 is strong decks, and with the right pilot can actually make deep runs in tournaments, but I wouldn't ever really bet on any of these decks to actually win. It would be more like one of those things where, like, oh my gosh, the Uta made it in Top Cut. The Uta looks like it has a pretty good position to win nationals, for example. Maybe more so one of those correct meta call decks. Tier 3 are decks that do some spice and you can excel with, especially at the local level. But truthfully, I think they're just on the cusp of missing components to be considered Tier 2 decks. And then we have the fun tier. This is going to be the bulk. These are just leaders that you probably just play at locals, have a little bit of fun with, some joy, especially if it's your pet deck. And I'm going to quickly fill those in first. So be right back. Alright, so I'm going to kind of talk about a couple of these fun leaders, but not spend too much time on them. Starting with Rebecca. So Rebecca, just in my opinion, honestly, pre-ban of Sakazuki, there's no reason that you should play Rebecca over Sakazuki, personally. Sakazuki is just such a strong deck and so good that, unless you really love Rebecca and the Dressrosa package, which is very near and dear to my heart, it's just not worth playing right now. Iceberg. I know I've really been on the train of Iceberg, but I couldn't really consider it Tier 3. Definitely didn't want to consider it any higher than that, so it's back in the fun tier. It is one of those decks, though, that are on the cusp of the up and down, but the Iceberg Warriors, man, stay strong. Trafalgar Law and Eustace Captain Kids are 2 cards that I really want to talk about. I mentioned in the previous video in my EB01 buy list. Go check that out if you haven't watched it, in case you need to buy singles for EB01. There are a ton of really good Supernova cards. The problem is, though, is that they're best utilized in Jewelry Bonnie. I think there's a valid argument to be made about when you include those Supernova cards, you give a boost to both Trafalgar Law and Eustace Captain Kidd, right? But all in all, I just don't really see it panning out, especially in this meta. And the last card I kind of want to talk about real quick is the Blue Purple Croc. Now, because Blue Purple Croc is Baroque Works, we've talked about in previous videos how the Baroque Works gets a gigantic boost with those excellent purple cards. But I think there's a key component that's missing in the Blue Purple Croc, and that is it's simply not just yellow. Speaking of yellow, Purple Yellow Croc, in my opinion, is a tiered 2 deck. I think this deck is pretty strong overall, and I know there's a huge fan base for the Laker Croc. That's why it has the nickname Laker Croc, right? And we showcased it in the video. You can go insane with that deck, especially in some certain key matchups. I would never expect Purple Yellow Croc to win a major necessarily, but if I saw one within the top 8 where there are several like red type decks, maybe some Utas, who knows, it genuinely might be something that can work out. Kazuki Odin, I'm going to place this in Tier 3. I think this is a really cool deck. The Land of Wano style and the additions that red gets in Land of Wano, as well as like the Hiyori Yamasan combo. Especially that specific combo has picked up a lot of steam over in East, and I think it's going to replicate out here with the Kazuki Odin decks. It's a really cool one. Having all of your non-counter characters immediately have counter in some form or fashion is just really, really good, I think, overall. You're definitely going to have to be able to draw more, though, and we'll see once OP07 officially releases if the Otama Searcher can really help you out. But at least for now, you have the Momonosuke. Zoro, I think, is also in that tier 2 category because I think Zoro just naturally continues with its aggression, right? A lot of times these faster decks, and we'll talk a couple more of those later, these faster decks just do so well against some of the more oppressive decks in the format just because of how early they can start being aggressive so consistently. If your opponent is off the beat at all in the game, you maximize on that and you have the potential to really pan out and take the win. I think Edward Newgate's in a similar spot as the Zoro. We've seen Edward Newgate actually do really, really well out here in the West at the end of the OP06 format, especially as we're gearing into different matchups such as the black-yellow Luffy and the starter deck 13 leaders. Having a leader that is 6,000 power but also has the ability to go up to 8 in a given turn with that 9 cost Edward Newgate can be really, really strong. It can also provide a lot of issues for decks, especially the black decks that really like to play the 8 cost Gecko Moria. It's a really interesting spot. I also know the West loves Edward Newgate decks, so I would expect to see Edward Newgate find some success. Now, this will pain me to say, but I really think Nami is tier 3 borderline unplayable. The reason that I say that is because with the S tier decks that we'll talk about later, it's really oppressive towards Nami and really just counters overall the things that it can do. So I expect Nami to really just drop almost out of it entirely. The only reason that I still have it in tier 3 and I haven't put it in the fun category is because if your locals maybe doesn't have a ton of Sakazuki or even the red purple law, right, a lot of those counter decks, Nami might actually have a chance to thrive in a tournament because the only people that are going to be playing Nami are the people that play it all the time, literally every day. Copium. I'm also one of them in the Copium. Now, Katakuri, continuing in OP03, I think is a tier 1 deck. I think it's one of the better decks in format, especially with the addition of that 2K Charlotte Flampe. The Charlotte Flampe in itself immediately replaces Struzen, but also is a really, really nice addition to the deck to be able to draw cards if needed to help you find your more imperative cards like the 7 and 10 drop Lin. Also, just being able to cheat out extra power, right, with that 1 Dawn attachment going up to 7,000 power is really, really good in a lot of decks that have important triggers. You know, you talk about the mirror match per se, you talk about the black-yellow Luffy, right, any sort of yellow deck, and really just in general, right? You look at your opponent's life as you're facing Zoro, you see the 5 cost Luffy and you're like, nope, don't want to put that in their hand, you know. It's just overall this leader effect is so good in combination with the Big Mom Pirate cards. Now, Bello Betty, I think, is a tier 3 deck. It's very similar to Nami in the sense that there are some people that really play this deck and really excel with the deck overall, but it's just short because of the same reasons of all the bottom decking in the format, similar to Nami. It's just one step under the Zoro, in my opinion, where like you just go really fast, and if your opponent is offbeat for a split second or one single turn, you can capitalize on that. I just think Zoro does it better because Zoro can play so many low cost bodies that start hitting and poking. The OP06 set did a huge huge boost for Bello Betty overall, but in my opinion, not enough to get it to where it could be. Sakazuki is one of the S tier decks. S tier, again, being considerably like the best deck in format, just about, and forces the entire meta to shift around it, right? You need to play decks that have decent Sakazuki matchups, right? Either winning or even in order to realistically have chances in tournaments. Sakazuki doesn't get much, but the extra addition of the 2K T-Bone and potentially using the Brook every so often is just strong enough for the deck overall to just really thrive. It also excels at competing with Red Purple Law. I'm going to skip ahead to Red Purple Law because I think they go in conjunction, because it's one of the answers of Red Purple Law cheating out those bodies, right? Really making them consider, okay, if you're going to use that leader effect to bottom deck one of my bodies, you're going to lose 3 Dawn, and I'm going to use my effects to bottom deck or KO your characters as well. These two will duel head to head, and these two bottom decking effects will rule the format. And Red Purple Law just getting so many good additions in the deck with Killer and Kid, with the Mr. 2 Bond Clay, just really overpower it overall, in my opinion. It's a deck that people have been hammering away for so long, and now it's going to get the spotlight. So I assume, honestly, especially with the major tournaments, I think we'll actually potentially see Red Purple Law have more success in the major top 8 regional finishes than it did in the East Japan Championship prelims. Anel, though, Anel is one of those decks that I'm like, oh man, where do I put this? And I think I'm gonna put it in tier 2, but if I had to tier inside the tier 2, it's honestly in the upper level of tier 2. Anel just really aggressive now at this point with the Rygo and also the I Am God cards, giving it some flexibility to really capitalize on your opponent on certain turns. It's a double-edged sword with those cards putting you down to 1 life, but if you're taking life early and frequently, then playing those cards are just rested Dawn overall. The deck is still strong in getting life every single turn. A lot of people will tell you this: if you don't know how to play against Anel, you're gonna lose. I think it's one of the stronger tier 2 decks. Perona is also a tier 2 deck in my opinion. It was really interesting because Perona won the championship prelim, did a really good job overall in that tournament, in that stretch that we covered on the channel. But I think Perona was more of what I mentioned earlier about tier 2 being like not one that you would bet on going into a tournament that would win, but seeing a top 8 bracket or top 16 bracket and being like, man, Perona has some really good matchups going into this. I think it was right place, right time, an excellent meta call, but Perona has not seen the success that we have seen as of late. But with the addition, like I constantly mention this, with the new supernovas that are coming, and also with that Land of Wano Yamasan and the Hiyori combo, could just be strong overall in a lot of situations. The deck is really interesting, and that leader effect is really cool overall. Yamato, though, in my mind, is a tier 1 deck. I think Yamato, just being so aggressive in the different ways that you can build it, is a deck that people are always going to have to be conscious of. We saw Yamato absolutely dominate out East, and we see it have a strong presence in the meta out here in the West. I think that'll continue, especially like I mentioned, Land of Wano combos. It could have a really interesting performance in the EB01 meta. Reiju, in my opinion, really falls off, drops into the tier 3 category overall. I think it's still like, it's a good deck, it's a nice deck, but the acceleration of Red Purple Law is really tough for this deck, right? You're fine against Sakazuki because at least with Sakazuki, you know, half of the characters, half the time, go in the trash instead of the bottom of the deck. But with Red Purple Law constantly bottom decking specific characters can make the matchup really tough overall for the Reiju players. So Reiju, I loved seeing the deck. It was really cool to see good pilots play the Reiju decks, but I think it might be time to hop off. Gecko Moira, I think, is a tier 1 deck with the additions of the Brook, like I had mentioned earlier. Just another really, really good deck overall. Being able to cheat characters out as well and continue to battle decks such as Sakazuki and Law. I think it does like kind of go down a little bit in the same sense that Reiju does, just not as severely because of the bottom decking shenanigans. But with the Gecko Moira being able to go through your deck pretty nicely and pretty easily, I will say one of the 2 decks to be able to beat Nami in decking out first, I think Gecko Moira is still a strong choice overall in this meta. Stronger, in my opinion, than Uta. Uta becomes much, much better because with a clear game plan and a clear, more consistent build of film characters in the Sanji and also the Bleno, those 2 additions do a great job for the Uta. I know Uta won EB01 Japan Nationals, but I don't know, even with the promos after a lot of testing, if it can really stand up to the best of the best consistently. At least it can have a really good run. It can have some pretty favorable matchups because, you know, it is a card game and there is somewhat of variance, but I think good Uta players that consistently play it will find some success. The Red Yellow Sabo, one of my pet decks, is sadly in tier 3. Even with the addition of Killer and Kid, I think this deck is wild. It's so tough because I have days where I am just on fire, I'm dominating, I'm topping at locals, and then I have other days where I just can't do anything. This deck sadly feels like more of a hot streak deck, but because of that hot streak, it's out of the fun tier. Plus, getting the additions of the Flampe, like I mentioned earlier, are just really nice overall. Another deck that really teeters on here is the Blue-Yellow Ace as part of the starter deck 13 cards. The Blue-Yellow Ace, in my mind, is also really cool, being able to kind of draw a little bit through your deck with that leader effect to put characters in life and hit your wombo combos. I think it has overall pretty okay matchups, but I think it can be really, really strong being able to draw cards in comparison to something like the Red Yellow Sabo. And really the unpredictability a lot of times of that deck could be really good going into a lot of different matchups and opponents. You could see one of these decks make a deep run. And finally, the Black Yellow Luffy, I would consider to be a tier 1 deck overall. The Black Yellow Luffy, in my opinion, does get a lot stronger with the newer cards that we talked about in the last video, but I think the thing holding it back is that it's super punishing. I think it gets way better in the OPO7 format to make it an S tier deck, but I think for now it's just one of the best decks to play. I think it's almost in the conversation, but just short, and so I put it on the level of tier 1. This is another deck that you really just need to know how to play against it, but I think a lot of people have started to figure out, and I think a lot of people will actually jump off this deck because of how difficult it is to play overall. So it'll be interesting to see. This is one of the more big question marks, I feel like, this Black Yellow Luffy in the format that I could really be incorrect about. And that's it. That's my EB01 tier list. Thank you so much for watching in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know your opinions nicely down below, and then also in the description if you want to make a tier list of your own, whether you're a fellow creator or you just want to show it off in our Discord server on Twitter, etc. There's a link of the template that you can do down there as well. Thank you again so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.